Today we're going to be looking at Sage 300, the bank reconciliation or bank services module. So today in the agenda, we're going to be looking at how bank services works. We're going to be looking at setting up your own bank accounts, how we create some distribution codes for some recurring transactions in bank services, such as bank entries, as well as looking at how we can process bank transfers, so transferring funds between two different bank accounts. We'll also go through the reconciliation process, so reconciling your physical bank statement against the transactions within your system. And we'll also look at being able to post the bank reconciliation to carry forward the balances from period to period, and printing bank reconciliation reports as well. So let's jump into it. So this is the latest version of Sage 300. It may look a little bit different to what you currently use, depending on the version that you currently work with. If I just go to the help and about, you can see we are using version 2021, which was released just earlier this year. So bank reconciliation or bank services, it resides within the common services area of the Sage 300 within the Sage 300 repertoire of modules. So, and the reason why, I guess, is it's just it sort of interacts or integrates with the accounts payables and accounts receivables area, as well as GL. So it's, I guess, common to all those areas. The module is set up very similar to all other modules, as you'll see or may have seen with accounts payable and accounts receivable. So you'll have your setup area, you'll have your bank transactions area, where you perform your reconciliations or your bank entries and transfers and whatnot. And also you've also got your reports area, so where we'll look at bank reconciliation reports and posting journals. If we just go into the bank setup area, so this is the area where you would go and set up the bank services module. So really the nuts and bolts behind the module itself. And like any other module, you'll see the options screen, which is just the basic module options. And if we go to the processing tab, you'll see a few options. These are primarily processing options that relate to setting up the system or the module that will allow you to have defaults within bank services. So I guess it allows you to streamline any of the processes that you are undertaking. The first option there is just default bank code. So Sage 300 allows you to maintain as many bank codes as you like, pretty much. It really comes down to being able to then reconciling the number of bank accounts. But you can have a number of bank accounts. This is just standard or just demo data. So you can see there's a few bank accounts that we have set up here. In this case, the FC Bank we'll choose that as our default bank code. It's pretty much going to be the one that we will use on a regular basis. You have a couple of reconciliation options. So this is primarily within the reconciliation screen. Checking for reconciled in a future period. So when you are reconciling your bank accounts, you would normally do that within a specific period. And if you attempt to try and reconcile a transaction beyond or outside that period, you can tell the system what you will want to happen if that does occur. So if you have a couple options there, you can set it either to error, so it actually stops you from doing that. I guess that's just a way of adding a control into the system, so it minimizes human error. The other options is warning. It just gives you a warning, but doesn't really do anything beyond that. Or you can just set to none. And we'll have a look at that in application when we do look at the reconciliation screen. sorting deposit details by the receipt number or by date. So in the reconciliation screen, when it comes to deposits, you can have a number of deposit entries or receipt entries for that deposit. And in the detail screen for all those deposit entries, you can sort those by either a date or the receipt number, whatever suits you. Transaction options. So when you are creating distribution codes, and we'll look at that just after this, you can see there are, when we do create different distribution codes, you can, if there is a particular distribution code that you always use, or 99% of the time when you're creating bank entries, that's the one that you're using, then you can add in that as a distribution code default, and it picks up the GL account in there. So we'll always populate that when you first open the screen. It's just a way of streamlining it. The recommended, I guess, setting is just to keep that blank. So it just keeps the flexibility open, but you always have an opportunity to add that as well. And finally, you will see a transfer adjustment GL account in the bottom there. That's only if you are using a multi-currency in Sage 300. So if you are using multi-currency options in Sage 300 for your company, then you will not see this GL account. And the GL account is just there to handle exchange roundings. So if there's sometimes a rounding of a couple of cents due to the exchange rate, it knows where to put that rounding off to. Documents tab, not too dissimilar to any other documents numbering in Sage 300, whether that's in accounts payable to do with invoices, accounts receivable invoices, or payment numbers or whatnot. Similar to the transaction types in bank services, where we've got bank entries and bank transfers, the system can record and keep track of the next number in sequence, so it's appropriately numbering that. And you can always change the length of those numbers. You can have a prefix before that number. You can always change the next number to suit your requirements. If you've never used bank services, or if it's a new company, it normally just starts off as 1 and goes beyond that. But let's say if you wanted to start at 1001 and whatnot, you can always change those settings in here. And there's just a read-only box here just for the next posting sequence. It just keeps a tally of every posting sequence in the system, gives it a unique number, and it just keeps a track of it in the options. That's pretty much the options for bank services. We won't make any changes for now. Let's jump onto the distribution codes setup. So distribution codes are pretty much a way of giving GL accounts or expense accounts a code and a name, so you can identify those codes. And these might be codes that you will be processing bank entries to on a regular basis. So in the system, as you can see here within demo data, you can see there's a number of them that have been set up. Like for example, interest revenue or service charges. Let's say we wanted to create a new one, so we just click the new button there. And let's say we call this int pay, and we'll just call that, let's say, for interest payments. So let's say there might be some interest that our bank is charging us that comes through, and we see on our bank statement that we want to add in as a bank entry. So we give it a description there, and then we allocate the corresponding GL account. So in this case, I'm just going to choose one of these accounts in here. You'll also see at the bottom a tax area for and you can select a tax authority for a particular distribution code. If you just click on the little magnifying glass, you can add a tax authority. So if it is taxable, you can always set that up, and then the system knows when you are adding that bank entry to apply the appropriate taxes accordingly. So I'll just choose one of the tax authorities, let's say GST, and in this case we'll just make it tax class 2 because fees don't really get charged tax, and we can just add that. So that's pretty much setting up your bank distribution codes, and you can set up as many as you need. Distribution sets is a screen that you can set up and group a number of distribution codes together in one set. So when you do add that set to a bank entry, it will create all the distributions in each line for you. And it's just a way of really, if you've got a number of distribution codes that you do set up within one bank entry that you do, let's say on a monthly basis, it's a good way to sort of streamline that process. The alternative would be to just keep adding in the distribution codes one by one. So, for example, we have one that's already set up. Let's say for charge or charges, bank charges. You can see here there's a number of distribution codes that we have set up. If we want to add in a new one, we just click the insert key, and then we can add in the distribution code that we just set up. You can see the GL account is populated automatically. You also have an amount field for each distribution code. If each code had a fixed amount, let's say it was always, your bank service charge was always $50 and the interest, was always 60 and whatnot, then you can always set them up accordingly, and that will appear in the bank entry. But if they always fluctuate or move, then I guess a good idea is just to leave them as 0. So then when it comes to creating the bank entry, you can always update the amounts that are applicable for that month. Credit card types is this a screen which keeps a list of the credit card types for bank services. As you can see, the usual suspects are available. Your Visas, your MasterCards, you can add others in there, and yeah, it's just maintaining this screen. GL integration, every module within Sage 300 would integrate with the general ledger. So as transactions are processed from bank services, being the sub-module, they flow downstream into general ledger. And the way that those transactions are created are set up in this general ledger setup screen. So you'll see a couple options in the integration tab, primarily on how the transactions will be created, and then how they're created by. So you can see here you have 2 options for when those transactions are created. During posting just means when you post the transaction, it'll automatically go in and create the GL batch for you. The other option is on request using a GL create batch icon. So that essentially just banks up all the transactions in bank services and then keeps tabs on those until such point as someone comes in and manually creates the GL batches. When you're creating the transactions by, so bank services just needs to know how you want to create them. So whether you want to add them to an existing batch, that just means if there's an open BK batch, you will just keep merging or adding those entries relating to the bank entries or the bank transfers into that existing batch until such time until it's posted. If there's no open batch, it will create a new batch and add those in there. Otherwise, the other two options are either creating a new batch or creating and posting a new batch. So the only difference between those two options is one will create the batch and leave it as an open status, so you can essentially edit that batch, and the other will create the batch but then post it. So once it's posted, it's committed it to the ledger and you can't edit it. If we select creating and posting the new batch, it's probably the most streamlined or real-time way of setting it up. As soon as you post bank entries or bank transfers, they will hit the ledger straight at that time, and it's purely a real-time system in that regard. The Transactions tab tells bank services when creating these transactions, like bank transfers and bank entries, what information comes from the submodule along with those transactions. And it can be important to set this up correctly so it allows the transparency between general ledger and where those transactions originated in bank services. So when you are printing things like the GL transaction listing reports, then those reports will print details from bank services relating to those bank entries, and then it's easier to identify where these transactions have come from, what they're for, what they're related to, and it allows auditability, it allows transparency between modules. If we wanted to, let's say, change one of these, we'll just go in and click. We want to change one of the transaction types, which is for bank entries. Let's say we want to, for that bank entry, we want to populate the GL detail reference with the entry number and the entry description, and click Save. So now for every transaction that gets created, that's exactly what the system will do. If you do change any of these settings, just be mindful that it won't go and make any changes to any transactions that have already been created down in GL. So it won't go through and sweep through and change that. What it does do is anything that it does create from this point on will be changed and be impacted by the change in this screen. Okay, let's jump to, so that is pretty much the bank setup and setting up of bank services. If we just jump up one level and just go to the bank services module header, and we'll see our banks screen. And this screen is where we create our bank accounts within bank services. As you can see, we have a number of banks that we've already created, and we'll just look at this FC bank as an example. So pretty much you have a bank code that you need to define that bank. Once you create the bank, you can't change the bank code. It's a primary key, so to speak. So just to be mindful that if you do make a mistake or with the bank code, you actually need to delete the bank and start the bank and start again. The description is just a text field describing the bank that can be updated at any time. Then you see a number of tabs. So profile tab is just the profile information relating to that bank account. You can see transit number and bank account number. They're just text fields, really. Transit number is essentially a business, like a BSB number. I guess it's a bit more Americanized or international bank label for calling it the transit number. And but really, you can just put in your BSB number in there if it's an Australian bank account. As they're just text fields, there's no real correlation to these, so it's not going to impact the way that transactions are posted or processed in other modules or anything like that, or if you have an EFT module that sort of piggybacks as a third-party product within Sage 300, usually those modules have their own screens where you do enter the BSB numbers and account numbers that impact the exporting of those EFTs into the bank. So generally, these fields aren't really used too much by the system. They're more indicative. You do have an inactive selection checkbox here against banks, so you can set a bank as inactive pretty much at any time. There's only a couple times where you won't be able to set a bank inactive, that one being if the bank is in between reconciliations. You'll get an error when you try and set it inactive. You'll need to post the reconciliation to do that. If you do set a bank inactive and you do have open transactions, let's say you're going to open AR receipt or an open bank entry, they will still allow you to post the transactions through, even though the bank was set inactive. It'll just stop you from creating new transactions. Multi-currency, if you are working in a multi-currency company, then you do have the option to set a bank to allow it to receive and pay through different currencies. If you set that option on, it can't be changed. So if you do make a mistake or create a bank, then with that option checked or unchecked, then you'll need to delete the banking and start again. And then obviously, if you are working in a multi-currency realm, then each bank code can only have one primary statement currency, which lives with that bank code. If you are using just a single currency system, then every bank will just represent your home or functional currency. Next deposit slip, when you are creating deposits, let's say through accounts receivable, it just keeps track of the next deposit slip number and increments accordingly beyond what you've got there. You've got an option here for days before eligible for clearing. So in the system, you can clear history, and it is recommended to clear history periodically to improve performance and speed of the reconciliation and the bank reconciliation screen. You can put a day delimiter in here. So if you are clearing out all your history, it can keep up to a certain number of days in history. So let's say if you do 365, if you clear history up until everything, it will still keep, let's say, 365 days worth or a year's worth, and preserve that in the system. Write-off errors and write-off spread. So when you are reconciling your bank reconciliations, if you've got any bank errors or write-offs, so if you are putting in an amount that has a variance, then you can control what that variance is. It's a mechanism to limit human error. So, if you just put in, let's say, $1 or $10, and then someone tried to put in a variance that was, let's say, $1,000 because they pressed in a few too many zeros, the system will stop them from doing that. So it's important to have a spread that you're comfortable with. If we just move on to the accounts tab. So our accounts tab keeps track and records our bank account or our banking control accounts. So any transactions that go through our bank will be processed down to the GL through that control account. It's also maintaining a write-off account. So when the system records a write-off and once a bank reconciliation is posted, it will create the subsequent transactions, writing off those amounts to that GL account. And you've also got a charges account. So if there's any AR receipts that include a credit card charge of some sort, then the system can account for that as well. Address tab, just text boxes and contact fields relating to your bank accounts. Pretty straightforward. Your check stocks, and I'll just maximize this. With your check stocks, so check stock codes are related to when you do print checks. So if they are accounts payable payments and you are printing your checks and you want the system to keep track of and record a check number, this is where you will instantiate your check stock code and your next check number. You can also determine the check form that you're using or advice form and any advices per line and the language for that check. Nowadays, it's becoming more rare to print checks, so check stocks still have a place, even though you might be processing payments through EFT. You may have large payment batches with a number of payment entries that you want to allocate a unique number. So it might be like a dummy check or an advice to those payments. So printing those checks is still valid. If you ever come to a situation where you're trying to print a check in accounts payable and you get an error which says there's no check stock code set up, this is the screen and the tab that it's talking about, and you need to come in here to define your check stocks. Currency tab, that relates to a multi-currency. Obviously, if you're only using a single currency company, then you won't see this tab. But in a multi-currency bank account, when you do have the multi-currency option ticked, this is where you will define your different currency codes that can accept payments or deposits through, and then the correlating exchange gain or loss. So if there are any exchange fluctuations, the system can handle those. Taxes tab, if this is just to set up your tax group against the bank. So it allows the system to account for tax when you do have bank entries or transfers going through the system with, for instance, service charges and whatnot. It can determine the appropriate tax implications for your tax tracking. Finally, your balances tab here. This is an important tab just to because it gives you a snapshot of where your bank account is at. Every time you post a reconciliation, the last statement date and the last reconciliation date gets updated. It's important to know that because when you do post a reconciliation for a particular date, you won't be able to go and post another one before that date. So, and if you try to enter dates that are earlier, you will get errors. So you can come into this screen to see exactly when was the last reconciliation date. And you also get a snapshot of the deposits and withdrawals and the current balance against that bank as well. Let's say we wanted to create a new bank code, and we can just do that really, really quickly. So if we click the new button, and let's say we want to create an Australia New Zealand ANZ bank code. And you can see all the information in here is sort of set to default or blank, and we start to add in some of the information for that new bank account. So let's say in here we wanted to start our next deposit slip number as 1, have 45 days, and we'll put a spread of $1. Our BSBN account number, again, it's indicative, so we can just put in whatever number we want in there. We won't have it as multi-currency, so we'll just leave that because we're an Australian bank working in an Australian company in this example. Our bank account, so before this, we would have assumed to have created a GL account for the control account. So let's say we'll just choose that account. We'll pick our charges account in here. Sorry, our write-off account and our charges account. We'll come back and do the addresses, check stock codes. We're not going to print any checks for this account, so we'll just leave them as blank. Taxes, we can add a tax group in here. And you can see our balances are all 0. So if we click add, it's as simple as that. We just added a new bank, and we can use that to transact against. Okay. Let's move on to our reconciliation screen. So that resides in the bank transactions area, and we go to our reconcile statements screen. Double click on that. Just maximize that. So you can see basically with our setups, we've set up the FC Bank as our default. So you can see how that gets picked up straight away when we've opened this screen. If we set up another bank as a default, that bank will be pre-populated. We can put in a reconciliation description, so this describes the reconciliation. So we can just do bank rec July, for example. We can pretty much put anything we want in that. This reconciliation description will appear on some of the report that we'll print later. In the summary screen, when we're doing a bank reconciliation, so that might mean we've printed out a physical bank statement from your bank account and we're ready to do a bank reconciliation. There'll be a statement date on there. And for all intensive purposes, we'll just select that being 31st of July, 2020. And we'll put in our statement amount. Let's say our statement amount equals, will be in credit, and 91 cents. Tab off that. So when you do that, you can already see that some of the adjustment balance has been updated and the added balance is now updated. When we begin to reconcile, the balance, added balance by will update. And I guess the end game or the goal is to reconcile our bank statement so then the added balance becomes 0, meaning our bank statement and our reconciliation and our book value, book balance. And that reconciliation balance is on this side of the screen. You can see our reconciliation date, which we're reconciling to. We can also drill into that book balance to pick up exactly where that book balance is derived from. So if we click the zoom button, we can see the book balance consists of what the balance was as our last reconciliation. Because we've never reconciled this bank account, it will be 0. But as you reconcile period to period, it'll carry forward that reconciliation balance and then continue on. It will tell us what our deposits outstanding amount is, what our withdrawals outstanding amount is. So those are the transactions flowing through the bank reconciliation, either from accounts receivable, accounts payable, or bank services. And it'll give us a balance here. You'll also get to see a GL balance. So the GL balance is the balance of the control account at the GL level. It may or may not balance with the book balance, depending on if you are posting those transactions down into GL or if you have any open batches and things like that. It just gives us a good indication if there are any situations like that we know that we might not have posted anything. Or if, let's say, if we're doing a journal into our control account directly in GL, as you might not be aware, those transactions don't flow back up into bank services. So if you are doing any of those discrepancies will be highlighted in this screen as well. And the GL balance will also show the balance at the end of the period. So if you are reconciling, let's say on a daily or on a weekly basis, and your book balance might not be the same as your GL balance, it might mean that there are transactions that have hit the general ledger in that period, but may have been cut off by the current reconciliation date, which might be mid-month. If we go into our reconciliation tab, we can see all the transactions that have come into our system or our reconciliation. And I'm just going to just minimize it a little bit so I can see it on my side. and hopefully you can see everything. You can see in this screen that all these transactions, withdrawals, and deposits are outstanding. So to purely and simply to go through the bank reconciliation and reconcile these transactions, you can simply go through and double tick the reconciliation and tell it that these amounts have been reconciled. And when you start to do that, you can see that the system starts to record what's been reconciled, keeps track of that tally, and our added balance gets updated as well. You can also filter the transactions by reconciled or outstanding. So let's say we want to display what's been reconciled, it'll just filter through. So this is an easy way to sort of get a handle, especially when you've got a number of transactions in there. If we want to clear transactions in a different realm other than being cleared, we can use the reconciliation status field to double click and then choose exactly if we want to set it as cleared, which is the same as double clicking on that reconciled area. If you want to clear it with a bank error or a bank write-off, we can set that the same, and then we can determine what our amount is. So let's say we do 728, then we can see there's a difference and there's a write-off amount. When we post the bank reconciliation, the system will create the journals to choose put through that write-off. If you are doing with a bank error, then it will carry forward the difference to the next period after you post the bank reconciliation, assuming the bank will correct that error in the next period. Perhaps a simpler way of reconciling a large bank reconciliation is to use the quick clearing functions. So if you use the quick clearing functions, we can actually clear a range of transactions in one hit. So here we've got withdrawals, and we can mark them as cleared, and you can see it's by default choosing the whole range, but you can also change the range. But in this case, we go, okay, we want to just reconcile everything because we know they've all been reconciled. Just click process, and it's reconciled everything quickly. Similarly with deposits, change to cleared. Again, it's got the default range. Click process, and we can see they've all been reconciled. As we can see there, our added balance has now changed. Our total withdrawals and deposits have been updated. If we go to our totals tab, we can also see that has been reflected. Let's say we want to just add a bank entry. Now that we've identified that there's actually a bank entry gone through our bank, we can choose that to do that by clicking the bank entry button at the bottom here. And you can see the bank entry number with the new, we'll pick up the next number. You can call give it a description. We can see that the bank code has been set because we're using this bank. We can either do a withdrawal or a deposit. In this case, we'll just do a withdrawal. We'll just set the payment type as other, and we can pick our distribution codes. If you call our distribution codes that we set up, these are the one that we set up, our interpay. And we can put in, there was an interest paid of $50. This is our taxable area. If I double click that on yes, for example, and drill down into it, we can change and determine it records and calculates taxes based on what we've set up. But you can always change the tax classes if you need to in the screen. For this purpose, we'll just uncheck that as set as no. And we'll just click the add button. When we click add, you can see that it does add the transaction at the bottom there, but it's set as a reconciliation status as not posted. So we can't actually clear that off yet because we actually haven't posted the bank entry. If we want to post that, we'll just come back into the summary screen, and you can see here that the bank entry is not posted. Amount has been updated, and we can post that by clicking the Go button in here, and this screen allows us to post that entry. So if we go through and post it, it posts the transaction, and based on our GL integration settings, it's created our GL transaction as well. And you can see now the amount is set as posted as a withdrawal, and it's outstanding. If we wanted to drill down into that bank entry, again, to check it, that it's all correct, we can just highlight that, and at the top, click our drill down, and it will take us into here. And you can do the same drill downs with any of the transactions. So our deposit details gives us our details screen, and then you can also click the document, and it'll take us right back to the source document, the AR receipt where that appeared from. Okay, let's have a look at a bank transfer. So let's say we wanted to record that there was a transfer of money from one of our bank accounts to another. So we've just minimized our reconciliation statement screen. We'll go into our bank transfer screen. And in this screen, essentially a bank transfer is pretty much the same as two bank entries. So you're withdrawing out of one and depositing another bank entry into another, but it just does it in the same screen. We'll do the bank transfer date as of 31st of the 7th. We can put in a description and a reference. And we can choose the bank that it's coming from. So let's say it's coming from this other bank here. And we'll say it's a $50 amount, and we're going to put that into our FC bank. Let's see, it's $50. Service charges at the bottom, just be mindful. So if your bank does charge you a service charge for the transfer, this is where you would put in the service charges in here, and you can add in a distribution code or a GL account, and the system will create the GLs relating to those expenses. And we'll just go and post that. So once we've posted that, you can see if we go back into our reconciliation, and we'll just click the calculate button, which will ask us to save the reconciliation. So at any time you can save the reconciliation at the bottom. If you close the screen and come back into it, it'll update that. And you can see our transfer has come into our bank as a deposit, and we can drill down into that if we want. You can see the transfers. With regards to reports, there's a couple of reports that we can look at with regards to bank reconciliations. If we go to bank transaction reports and print the bank reconciliation report, we can select our bank. And when we print this report, this will give us a snapshot of the current bank reconciliation. It will also show us details of what's outstanding in the bank reconciliation. It's a good report before posting the bank reconciliation if you need a manager or someone of authority to check that everything is being ticked off and ready with that current bank reconciliation. This is the report that you would normally print. As you can see, the reconciliation description is printed there, and you can see those two transactions which I haven't cleared are picked up, and all the balances picked up accordingly. So you can see our deposits outstanding, withdrawals outstanding, haven't been picked up as being reconciled. Let's go back into the reconciliation screen, and let's say we are going to clear these out like so. And now that we've gone, so everything's been reconciled, everything's been saved and calculated, and we're ready to post the reconciliation. You can see our outer balance is 0. So we are happy to just say that everything has been reconciled with our bank statement. All we do is we click the post button at the bottom, and we'll post our reconciliation. You can see 1 out of 1 has been posted. If you are using a slightly older version of Sage 300, that post button will not appear there. The post button or the posting screen will appear in the post reconciliation screen in here. So this is what you might be used to, and you can post that from that post the bank. It's the same setup is in the new version as well, but this screen will probably not be used as much because you can just post it from the reconcile statement screen. Just finally, once we posted the bank reconciliation, the system will keep a record of that posting. And if we want to review that posting or prior reconciliation postings, we can go into the reconciliation posting journal report. And it's based on posting sequence number. So every posting will receive a sequence number, and we can select our posting sequence number which related to our last bank reconciliation and choose that. And we'll just click print. And this report will essentially give us a snapshot of that posted bank reconciliation. So if we just go to the last page, you can see exactly how the bank reconciliation presented at that time, what's been cleared, and the adjusted book balance and statement balance. And you can see all the deposits and the withdrawals that have been totaled up that have been cleared with that bank reconciliation. Finally, now that we've posted our bank rec, you can see the statement balance has been reset. You can also see that if we go into the reconciliation screen, I'll just put in the date again and go into the reconciliation tab, all the transactions have now been cleared out. So it clears out all the ones that we've been doing. In a real world environment, these will be populated with transactions after the fact, but all the transactions that we've been cleared and reconciled will have been cleared out, and the balance will have carried forward. So now you've got a book balance as of last reconciliation, which was originally 0. You can see that balance is now carried forward for our next period.